want to call the meeting to order. Ranking Member Shelby is on his way, so we'll get started. I just want to start by welcoming our witnesses, folks that have been in service to this country for a long, long time. Acting Secretary John Roth has over 40 years of service to this nation as Department of Defense civilian. With a background in budgeting and financial management, his background makes him an ideal witness for this hearing today. General Charles Brown is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. His record as a pilot and commander is exceptional. And I might add, he also makes an outstanding travel companion. General, I want to thank you for visiting Malmstrom Air Force Base and the Montana Air National Guard a few weeks ago. And I just have a question I want you to address in your opening statement, and that is, what does the Q and CQ Brown stand for? Other than that, it's good. And finally, General John W. Raymond, Chief of Space Operations, welcome. General Raymond has over 30 years career in the space positions, and it's our nation's first leader of Space Force. This is the subcommittee's first hearing with General Raymond, and I look forward to hearing your assessment of Space Force and where it stands today. The Air Force and Space Force are meeting the challenges of near-peer competition with other nations with an aggressive modernization program. With new continued investments in updated platforms like the F-15EX, new platforms like the B-21 bomber, and leaping ahead with new space capabilities, our witnesses are clearly focused on preparing to deter and, if necessary, fight the wars of tomorrow. But we're also in a time of constrained budgets. To bridge the gap between the resources available and developing new weapons, the Air Force is proposing to retire legacy systems. When military leaders tell me that they believe spending money on something is no longer a good idea, I take that very seriously. But I also know that new weapons rarely deliver on time and on budget. This subcommittee needs to ask the question of whether the Air Force is rolling the dice with the strategy of retiring airplanes in favor of systems still on the drawing board, or if some of those bets may be better than others. I just want to close by saying I want to thank the witnesses ahead for the testimony they're about to give, and I look forward to hearing from each one of them. And I think we'll start with witness testimony. Hang on here. Okay. Mr. Roth, you may start.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Tester. Thank you, Chairman Leahy, members of the committee. It is a pleasure to be here today. I am also honored to have General Brown and General Raymond join me in representing the nearly 700,000 airmen and guardians that defend our nation. We are thankful for your consistent and persistent support over the years, which has enabled us to build the world's greatest air and space forces. As an integrated force, our airmen and guardians stand ready, willing, and able to meet responsibilities to our nation and continue defending the high ground. From 300 feet to 300 miles off the ground, we protect the homeland, we project power, and we defend democracy. The long-term strategic competition with China and Russia demands we focus on capabilities we need today to win tomorrow. Our nation's competitive strategic advantage relies on air and space superiority, which is underpinned by rapid technological advancement and the extension of space as a warfighting domain. In line with Secretary Austin's priorities to defend the nation, take care of our people, and succeed through teamwork, our fiscal year 2022 budget is the beginning of a journey to the Air and Space Forces of 2030. It builds the capabilities that allow the department to modernize while continuing to meet the national security objectives and defend the high ground. Specifically, we are committed to investing in 1, empowering airmen and guardians, 2, capability-focused modernization, 3, connecting us to the joint force, and 4, expanding partnerships. First, our airmen and guardians remain the heart of our ability to deter and, if necessary, defeat our competitors. We are transforming our talent management systems to ensure we develop and train leaders with the competence, character, and skills required to win high-end fights. And we remain devoted to recruiting and retaining a diverse core of multi-capable, innovative talent to outmaneuver our adversaries today and in the future. We owe it to our force to provide them with an environment where all can thrive. That is why we are directing critical resources to rid our ranks of any corrosive elements and injustices that degrade our ability to provide a lethal, ready force. Second, to remain the world's greatest air and space force, we must look to the future through a lens of capability-based modernization. Evidenced by nuclear modernization and next-generation air dominance platforms, our digital acquisition approach revolutionizes how we design and field capabilities to the warfighters. Moving forward, we will expand on these digital revolutions while also investing in next-generation space systems that are resilient and defensive. Space is no longer a benign domain. Our U.S. Space Force was purpose-built to deter and protect free access to space. Third, combatant commanders require an agile military that operates seamlessly across all domains at both speed and scale. That is why we continue to invest in capabilities like the Advanced Battle Management System, our contribution to Joint All-Domain Command and Control, which will connect every sensor to every shooter across all domains. Likewise, access to and freedom of action in space is central to connecting us to the joint force. In its second year, the U.S. Space Force is laser-focused on integration. Investments in space capabilities increase the effectiveness of operations across all domains. The result is a U.S. military that is better connected, better informed, faster, and more precise. Finally, the U.S. Air and Space Forces do not fight alone. We benefit from the expertise and capabilities of our sister services and coalition forces, as well as the whole of government, commercial industry, and academia. We will continue to invest in enduring relationships while expanding new partnerships to transfer how we fight future wars. Members of the committee, thank you for inviting us to testify. I look forward to your support and am confident that with your help, the Air and Space Forces will be armed with the capabilities necessary to protect our nation and defend the high ground. We welcome your questions, and I ask that this opening statement be entered into the record. Thank you.
And it will be, and thank you, Secretary Roth. Senator Shelby, do you have anything you'd like to say before we move to General Brown?
I just have a statement that has to be placed in the record.
Without objection, so done. Thank you, Senator Shelby. General Brown.
Good afternoon, Chairman Tester, Chairman Leahy, Ranking Member Shelby, and distinguished members of this committee. I'm humbled to serve as our nation's 22nd Air Force Chief of Staff and represent the 689,000 total force airmen serving today. Your support to our airmen and their families is greatly appreciated. It's an honor to appear before you today with Acting Secretary Roth and my fellow service chief and friend of many years, General Raymond. As a general officer, I've spent the last decade plus in joint positions overseas and/or supporting operations in the Middle East, Europe, Africa, and most recently the Indo-Pacific. With this context, I've been able to look at the Air Force from varied perspectives. And I have personally seen the reemergence of great power competition and how the character war has changed. The strategic environment has rapidly evolved, and we haven't changed fast enough to keep pace. The People's Republic of China has recognized modern warfare as a contest among systems, not individual units or platforms. Accordingly, Secretary Austin has prioritized China as our pacing threat. Meanwhile, Russia continues to modernize its armed forces, increasing the capability of its missiles, strike aircraft, warships, artillery systems, and nuclear weapons. And competition and future warfare will be conducted across all domains simultaneously. It will be trans-regional and a global undertaking with complex actions and actors intertwined. To account for these changes, our nation, our Air Force, must change faster than we have been. If we continue on the path of incremental change, our advantage erodes and losing becomes a distinct possibility. The Air Force recently updated our mission statement: to fly, fight, and win, air power, anytime, anywhere. To execute this mission now and into the future, we must transition our Air Force and our operational concepts from today to tomorrow, and we must do so faster. That's why I wrote Accelerate, Change, or Lose, to call attention to the changes in the strategic environment. Because the mix of capabilities that our Air Force has now, that were good enough for yesterday, that are good enough for today, will fail tomorrow. Our future Air Force must be agile, resilient, and connected, with the ability to generate near instantaneous effects anytime, anywhere. Not just sometime, in some places, but anytime, anywhere. Our Air Force is the only service that provides our joint teammates and our allies and partners the assurance of air superiority, the advantage of global strike, and the agility of rapid global mobility through a range of capabilities most requested by today's combatant commanders. Additionally, the Air Force's ISR and command and control capabilities provide the ability to sense, make sense, and act. But while our past and current capabilities have sufficed for the last 3 decades, it will not effectively perform in tomorrow's highly contested environment. To address the challenges that will endanger our national security tomorrow, the transition to the future Air Force design must start today. Finally, we have a foundational responsibility to our airmen and their families. I remain focused on ensuring we are ready and that we have the tools, infrastructure, and talent management systems to provide the environment where all can reach their full potential. The future Air Force design advances our core missions and new approaches to warfighting that holistically support every combatant commander and benefit every service chief. Investing in your Air Force is an investment in the joint force. Ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line is simple. We must modernize for the future and focus on capabilities that maintain our advantage both today and tomorrow. For decades, we collaborated with Congress, our industry partners, to modernize for the future. Now, to fulfill our responsibility to ensure our national security, we must be willing to change, to make the tough choices required to deliberately transform our Air Force to the future force we need to compete, deter, and win. We've done it before, and I'm confident together we can do it again. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And before I close, I'd like to answer Chairman Tester's question. The Q stands for Quentin. I look forward to taking your questions, additional questions throughout the rest of the hearing.
That's a good answer, because I just won $5 off my staff. General, thank you, General Brown. General Raymond.
Chairman Tester, Chairman Leahy, Ranking Member Shelby, and distinguished members of this committee, it's an honor to appear before you for the first time, and to do so alongside Secretary Roth, the Acting Secretary of the Air Force, and General C.Q. Brown, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, a longtime friend and a longtime teammate. On behalf of the Guardians that are stationed worldwide, let me begin by thanking you for the continued leadership and strong support that you provided to the Space Force. The United States is a spacefaring nation. We have long understood that our nation is strongest economically, diplomatically, and militarily when we have access to and freedom to maneuver in space. For the past 3 decades, we have been able to take that access and that freedom to maneuver for granted. Unfortunately, as the National Defense Strategy and the newer Interim National Security Strategy identified, this is no longer the case. Both China, our pacing threat, and Russia continue to develop 2 things. First, they're developing space capabilities for their own use, so they have that same advantage that we have. And secondly, they're building weapon systems specifically designed to deny our space-enabled advantages that America currently enjoys. These threats that they're developing include robust jamming of our GPS satellite constellation and communication satellites, directed energy systems that can blind, disrupt, or damage our satellites, anti-satellite weapons in space that are purpose-built to destroy U.S. satellites, and cyber capabilities that can deny our access to the domain. Thankfully, with the strong support of Congress, the United States seized on the opportunity to make needed changes to stay ahead of the growing threat by establishing the United States Space Force. This leadership is resonating globally and is already delivering results for our nation. We have slashed bureaucracy at every level in order to empower our guardians to move at speed and to increase accountability necessary to successfully operate in this domain. We put together a very forward-leaning human capital strategy, allowing us to build a more highly trained, educated, and developed warfighting force, while taking care of guardians and their families throughout their entire career. We wrote our first doctrine to clearly articulate the independent value of space power to joint and coalition forces, and this importance is fully captured in the Department's new joint warfighting construct that's being developed. Our international partnerships are stronger, with many of our partner nations following our lead in elevating space inside of their militaries. We have created a new end-to-end capability development process from force design and requirements to acquisition and testing, enabled by a digital thread to move at speed while driving unity of effort across the Department of Defense. We have rejected stovepipes by actively working with the Joint Force and other government agencies and industry to compete, deter, and win at an affordable cost. The Space Force cannot and will not tolerate business as usual. Our demanding mission and lean force demand nothing less than a new standard of efficiency. The budget reflects the shift of many Department of Defense space activities into the Space Force, yet we remain about 2.5% of the overall Department of Defense budget. We are committed to stretching every dollar to its limit to buy as much capability as possible for our nation. This fiscal year, the 2022 budget balances the need to protect capabilities we have on orbit now while shifting and modernizing to a more defendable architecture in the future. It is an investment that provides assured space capabilities to our sister services, our nation, and to our coalition warfighting partners. These demanding tasks could not have been possible without sustained support from Congress, including this committee, and for that I thank you. We cannot afford to lose space. I am absolutely honored and humbled to serve as the first Chief of Space Operations and to have the opportunity to serve side by side with the incredible guardians that I'm privileged to lead. It is because of them that our nation enjoys the benefits of space today, and it is because of them, America's sons and daughters, that we will compete, deter, and win in the future. I really look forward to your questions. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, General Raymond. We'll start with questions. Senator Leahy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I might note, just as a personal matter, I enjoyed talking with General Jones before we started about his time at Aviano Air Base, which is about 2 or 3 miles from where both my maternal grandparents were born, and Senator Shelby has been there with me. Secretary Roth, I've followed the Air Force's investment in electrical vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, or eVTOLs, I believe you call them. I even provided a recorded message for the AFWERX Virtual Agility Prime event last year. When I'm home in Vermont, actually, I land at the Burlington Airport, and I can walk from where I got off the plane to Beta Technologies, and I see one of these eVTOLs built by that company running test flights in our skies. And it's pretty impressive. Budget request includes $57 billion for Agility Prime, makes it the centerpiece of a new AFWERX initiative called AFWERX Prime, as you know. And what have you learned from Agility Prime that sets a model for this new approach to use federal dollars to complement private investment?
Well, exactly as you outlined, Senator Leahy. I think that the key for Agility Prime, and in particular the entire AFWorks initiative and efforts and all, is for us to leverage in a much greater way commercial capabilities. In fact, one of the names for the head of AFWorks is our, quote, Chief Commercialization Officer. And so that's the key here, is this is our way of seeking out partnerships with non-traditional defense or non-defense contractors and innovative kinds of organizations as well. Over the last couple of years, we've awarded over 1,500 contracts through the AFWorks initiative for about $700 million, and 75% of those 1,500 contracts were new to the Defense Department. That's exactly the kind of thing that we want to leverage going forward.
I know we put, last couple of years, we put $25 million in, from this committee for Agility Prime. And so you feel that what's accomplished from that leads to the doubling of the request for this year?
It's part of our science and technology program. And Agility Prime, it's a neat effort, as you say. People nickname it the passenger car and all, and it may have some combat rescue kinds of efforts or logistics support and all, but it's just an opportunity to do things that we don't normally do. And it works to such an extent, we're now going to stand up a SpaceWorks as well, okay, to try to do the same sort of things with the space capabilities. And again, it's our way of trying to plug in. We understand the commercial market in many of these technologies is way ahead of us.
So I'm not wasting my time going by and seeing what they're doing.
No, I hope not. I
Right.
actually hope not. We're very excited by what's going on there. And it's all a matter of, we've taken a lot of beatings over the years of stovepipe, overly bureaucratized sort of acquisition process. This is a way of breaking that paradigm and looking at innovative ways of doing things smarter, quicker, and tapping into new technology.
Thank you. And General Brown, the Vermont National Guard's newest aircraft, the F-35A, has been operating full capacity in Vermont for over a year now. They've met all their training requirements. They participated in responding to the pandemic under our governor's command. My only concern I have about them is that the smart system purchased by the Air Force to manage that fleet's sustainment remains behind its capabilities. And I worry about the maintenance and sustainability of F-35. I know you want to take care of our people every way you can. So my final question is, are you looking at if this is being done as well as it could, the maintenance and all? Whoever wants to answer.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the question. And one of the key areas for us as we work the sustainment and to bring the sustainment costs down in the F-35 is not only what we do internally with the Air Force, but it's our close cooperation with the Joint Program Office, with our industry partners as we work through bringing down sustainment costs. And the key piece for the Air Force, and one of the areas is how we work our flying hour program, which that drives the fuel cost. It's also how we work our manpower and how we work parts. And we're focused on how we work through all three of those. And one of the areas that's is unique or different from what we've normally done is to do more of our work in the synthetic environment or in simulators, particularly with a very high-end capability and some of the sensitive things we want to do that can also help drive down some of the sustainment cost.
And I apologize for saying at one point General Jones, and of course I meant General Brown, and General Raymond, our talks that we've had before, I really appreciate it, and I hope we can have some more of those this year. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Shelby.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department of the Air Force posture statement notes, and I'll quote, that competitors like China and Russia are challenging America's advantage in space by aggressively developing weapons to deny or destroy U.S. space capabilities. General Raymond, could you discuss here in open hearing what you can, what the Space Force is doing to ensure that U.S. military and commercial space assets are protected from these threats as much as you can?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. And that threat is, as I mentioned in my opening statement, is very robust today, and it's growing, and it's very concerning.
That threat's real, though, isn't it?
It's real today. It's not something that we're thinking about that's going to materialize. It is real today and something that we have to address. We're addressing it in multiple ways. One, we're developing and training our folks to operate in a contested domain. We're developing tactics, techniques, and procedures to be able to operate through that congestion. We're designing new architectures, so rather than having a satellite constellation that has a handful of very exquisite, very expensive, very slow satellites that are not very defendable, and shifting to a more defendable architecture. We're also developing international partnerships to the level that we've never had before in the national security space side. And what used to be one-way partnerships now are really two-way partnerships that are delivering advantage. We operate together, we train together, we exercise together, we war game together, and for the first time, we're actually developing capabilities together that are getting capabilities onto orbit faster at a reduced cost. And so there's not just one thing that we're doing. Everything that we're doing as we establish the Space Force is focused on being able to stay ahead of that threat.
We recently, this subcommittee under the chairman's leadership, we recently had a classified hearing regarding on a lot of the future issues that we could talk about there. But the Air Force fiscal 22 budget request includes increased development funding for the nuclear enterprise, hypersonic weapons, advanced fighters, and so forth. What could you discuss here in open session where there's such a need to focus on other technology areas?
Inside the space domain, there absolutely is, sir. And there's four things that we're doing. First of all, we have to protect those capabilities that we have on orbit today. And so if you look at the budget request that we submitted, about 50% of that budget growth is for missions transferring over to others from other services. The other growth is on largely classified areas that we can go to in greater detail. But it's protecting what we have. It's developing a new architecture to shift to more defendable capability. 3, it's developing an offense because we're an armed service. And 4, it's looking at what other missions should transfer to space because we can do it there more cheaply or more effectively. And so it's balancing those 4 priorities, and I'll be happy to go into significant detail in a closed hearing on
Closer hearing. Isn't this a race, technological race, that we cannot afford to lose?
Sir, I could not agree more. As I mentioned in my opening comments, we spend, and every taxpayer dollar is precious. We spend 2.5% of our budget on space. Space is a huge force multiplier. All the other services, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, and all of our joint war plans all assume that we're going to have access to space and that we have freedom to maneuver. If you lose that, we have a strong risk of losing, and we cannot afford to lose space.
General Brown, I'll direct this to you, sir. Can you comment on China's efforts, is what you can in open session, to increase capabilities, including their investments in advanced aircraft and hypersonic weapons? You know, that's a given. We understand that. And they're pretty far advanced. They have the technological base, do they not?
They do, Senator. One of the things I would highlight is not only my time here as the Chief of Staff, but the past 2 years I had as the PACAF commander was to watch how the People's Republic of China and their armed forces were increasing their capability in their testing of hypersonic weapons, their increased operational aspect of their aircraft, the increased range of their missiles, and we've got to continue.
That's offense and defense, isn't it?
Both offense and defense.
Both.
Yes, Senator. And so it's concerning to me that we have an advantage today, but I think we still got to continue to move forward so we do not lose that advantage as an Air Force.
Mr. Secretary, I leave one for you. The quest and the challenges that we all face in quantum computing, but that is something that could change just about everything, is it not?
Well, it certainly can, and with that, things like artificial intelligence. So, I mean, there's a series of technological priorities that we have. One is microelectronics. We need to invest in microelectronics. Hypersonics, the general mentioned hypersonics. We need to invest in hypersonics. Artificial
Are they interrelated somewhere at times?
They're all interconnected in some manner, shape, or form. Absolutely, Senator, you're spot on.
But it's the next generation, isn't it?
Well, that's the point. We're looking to the future. We're looking to 2025, 2030, and beyond. And our sense is we need, given the major power competition that we're facing here in the future, that we need to target our investments toward the future.
In the area of cybersecurity, we've recently witnessed in this country a little of it, but a lot of it in the East Coast, to shut down the pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline, temporarily. We have the capability to do a lot of things too, but a lot of these countries don't really own up to what they're doing, or they let other people do under their umbrella, so to speak. How do we get our hands on defensing cybersecurity there, and is it more of a challenge than people think?
I'll start, and the two generals can come bail me out at some point here.
It goes
again,
to defense and everything, but also the private sector.
Yes. No, we need to partner with the private sector. We, of course, we help work with Cybercom in terms of their capabilities. Some of our airmen and guardians are on their team, on their cybersecurity teams and these kinds of things. So we work very closely with them. We're also very concerned about protecting our networks. And I will say, for example, that a lot of what we're going to do in the future is this joint all-domain command and control. Our piece of this is the Advanced Battle Management System. Data security, cyber security, in order to get that data from point A to point B, becomes absolutely fundamental for us to operate in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, thanks, Senator Shelby. I'm going to get a little more parochial. So this is for you, General Brown. I would like to get an update from you on the MH-139 helicopter. This helicopter is vital to our ICBM bases. But there are no funds in this budget to buy more in 2022. So a couple questions. Number one, if there are any problems with the MH-139, what are they? When will they be fixed? And in Montana, for example, these helicopters were supposed to be here in the fall of 2021. They're projected to be there in the fall of 2023. But this budget looks to me like they're not even going to be there in the fall of 2023. Could you just let me know what's going on?
Sure, Senator. One of the challenges we've run into, this is the MH-139 is built on a commercial platform, and we added military equipment to it. And then in the process of testing, we ran into a couple issues on the military application that was added to the commercial helicopter. We're resolving that piece. At the same time, we're continuing testing with the rest of the MH-139. And the intent here really to get to about the second quarter of FY23 is when we expect to have the delivery of the MH-139s, which is part of the reason why we did not go and procure during this particular budget cycle as we complete the testing.
So give me that again. Can Malmstrom expect those helicopters in the fall of 2023?
Second quarter of 2023 is when we expect to FY23, so it'll be the fall or even a little bit before that.
Okay. And what impact does this not having any money in for those helicopters in this budget mean?
It doesn't. We're continuing the testing. It's just we're not going to procure any during this particular budget cycle.
Okay. But these are already procured, right?
Senator, that delay actually is just a matter of months. The contract award in fiscal year 22 was scheduled for the fourth quarter.
Okay.
And because of the slippage in the FAA certification, it's now slipping into FY22. So the 23, excuse me. So the 22 money was actually unexecutable. So we simply made a bit of a budget shift,
Gotcha.
and the delay there is months, not years.
Thank you. General Brown, I want to talk about 130s, for example. 130s for a second. I talked in my opening statement about the fact that legacy if you walk up to me and say, we don't need this equipment anymore, I value that perspective. And quite frankly, I'm going to do my best to make sure that we meet the needs of the Air Force, and if these aren't needed anymore, we should do away with them. I do have a question about the C-130s, though, and that is, there are many, many Guard units throughout the United States that have them. They seem to be a pretty good aircraft. They've certainly stood the test of time, and they still have a pretty, I think, important cargo aspect to them from an airlift capacity. This budget divests of 8 of those C-130Hs. So the question is number one, and I hate to ask this question, but I've got to ask this question. When you're looking at needs, are you looking at domestic needs too? I would assume the answer to that is yes.
We are. We look at both the needs for our national security, both overseas, but also here inside the United States for homeland defense and support of our.
So what information do you have that shows that the National Guard has excess tactical airlift capacity?
It's part of the analysis we do with Transcom as we look at the overall C-130 fleet, and as we look and add in C-130Js. The C-130Js are a bit more capable as far as range and as well as capacity.
Yes.
In our C-130H models, and we are upgrading from our H1 to our H2 and H3, which provides some additional capacity from the older C-130s.
So can you tell me? I hope you can actually on how many National Guard squadrons are going to lose flying missions?
Right.
In this budget?
In this budget, that's kind of a complicated question. As we look at not only C-130s, but with all the things we're trying to get done across the Air Force, in some cases it's a one-for-one, where we're going from H models to J models.
Yep.
C-130. The same thing on our tankers. For KC-46s to replace 135s and KC-10s. In some cases, we're going to look to move to future missions. And I'll have to come back with more details on the specifics if you have a specific location you're interested in.
So the last one, then I'm going to move on to Senator Moran. But is it fair to say that there will be some Guard unit squadrons gone after this budget's implemented?
Senator, I wouldn't say gone. What I would say is what we're doing with each one of our Guard units is not to leave any one of them uncovered. Okay. And to ensure that we have missions, whether it's going back into a C-130 or into another airplane, but missions that are required for the United States Air Force, not only for the Air Force, but for our joint teammates and for our nation.
Okay. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. General Brown, let me continue with you. I'm pleased to see that the Skyborg program is moving forward. Unmanned autonomous wingmen have, I think, a real potential to protect our pilots while acting as a force multiplier. And I appreciate especially that the Air Force has recognized the expertise of university in my state, Wichita State University, and decided that they should be a part of the Skyborg program. Would you discuss for me the importance of digital design and advanced manufacturing as the Air Force, as new Air Force programs such as Skyborg are announced and undergo a less traditional acquisition process?
Sure. Senator, I see it as kind of the way of doing things in the future. When you look at a digital acquisition approach where we use digital engineering, open mission systems, and agile software to develop our capability much faster than we have in the past. At the same time, being able to do that not just in part of inside of the Department of Defense, but how we also work with our industry partners, both our large industry partners or even smaller companies that we don't normally engage with or have not historically engaged with, but also as we work with academia, like Wichita State. Those opportunities are tremendous because of the brain power and innovation we have within our nation to bring that capability together, to use it not only for our national defense needs, but for other needs internal to the nation.
I appreciate that answer. Would you describe how digital design transforms the way the Air Force designs and maintains its aircraft?
One of the pieces about digital design is now you can actually share the design of whatever platform or whatever aircraft, not just with the company that's building it, but with all the subcontractors. And so when they're able to share that design, all the pieces and parts come together much more quickly. And having had a chance to visit some of our industry partners that are going down this path, It speeds up the process to be able to manufacture capability. It drives down the risk in execution, in building, and gets us on cost and on schedule much better than we have been in the past.
The overall budget and the end of the year strength reductions are troublesome to me, Air Force and otherwise. My understanding, and as an example of the concern, my understanding is that the Air Force is still working to restore manning levels, person levels, for fully qualified aircraft maintainers since sequestration. And so those two things seem to me to be in conflict, and this may be for the Secretary. What is the Air Force planning to do to protect its aircraft maintainers from overwork and ensure that our most skilled maintainers want to stay in the Air Force?
I'll start in that. So as we've plussed up our manpower since sequestration with our on the maintenance side, so we are fully manned on our maintenance, but we're also building their experience. And so that's important from that aspect. The other is, how do we work smarter, not harder? And being able to use advantage of technology. We just talked about digital engineering. That approach helps us to speed up our ability to fix and maintain our aircraft. We're also looking at our retention models and how we support the retention of that quality airman and quality talent that comes into our Air Force. And so we're not having to continue to retrain. And so we're making progress in these areas. I'm pretty proud of the fact that we are fully manned. But again, we've got to experience that full manning to ensure we can actually be
General,
ready.
let me understand your answer. Are you suggesting, I'm taking offense at it, but the premise of my question is no longer accurate, that the things are okay in this manning situation?
Well, as far as we're close to 100% manning. It's just the experience levels. We brought a number of young airmen in at the same time, so building up their experience. So we have the numbers, but the experience level needs to increase.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Brown, it was good to speak with you on the telephone 2 weeks ago, and I'd like to follow up with you and the Secretary on an issue I raised during our call. California, as you know, is facing a horrible drought, and we've had 5 times as much acreage burned this year so far as we had last year. Last year, 4 million acres, 10,000 structures, including 5,000 homes burned. So that tells you a little bit about the size. Yesterday, I received your letter, thank you very much, updating me on progress in modifying the 7 Coast Guard aircraft for transfer to the state of California and to CAL FIRE in particular for firefighting. This was directed in the 2019 Defense Authorization Act. So here's the question. You state in your letter that the last aircraft will be delivered in June of 23. You also say that you will accelerate the timeline if you are able to. So is there any news for California? Is there anything that we can do to help you accelerate delivery?
Again, I appreciate speaking with you as well, and a little more detail from our conversation in the letter. The summer of 23, June of 23, will be the last of the 7 aircraft. The last of the 7 aircraft will be delivered in June of 23. They're already the steps for the aircraft is to go through a depot maintenance and then put the retardant delivery system onto the aircraft. So there are 2 aircraft that are already through the depot and going through the process of getting the retardant delivery system put on in Sacramento. And so the first 2 will be done at the fall of 22. And then it'll be through the next 6 to 7 months, you'll get the rest of the aircraft by June of 23. And my commitment is to try to, as much as we can, to work with California and the depot there in Sacramento to accelerate as much as we can.
Well, it's very much appreciated. As you know, these are big fires, and the amount of acreage burned is really huge. I hope to get in a second question. The budget put forward by the Department of Defense and by the Air Force is driven largely by the need to compete with China. Today, the Senate is considering a very broad array of measures to get tough on China. At the same time, I have a very strong belief that dialogue is critical to ensuring transparency and to reducing misunderstandings. One of the things that I've learned is that there has never been a military-to-military communication on an ongoing, effective basis with China. And I've written about this, and is there any effort to change this and improve relations with some military-to-military contacts, as many nations do? I think it would be a big help.
Senator, I'd have to defer to our within the Department of Defense policy on where they are as far as working through this process. But I will tell you that I would support the opportunity for myself, and I think for the other service chiefs, to communicate at a senior level, to avoid miscalculation that may create greater risk for all of us. And I agree with you, dialogue is important.
I would agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your leadership. General Brown, let me begin with you. You and I have had an opportunity previously to discuss the need for additional tanker support for missions and training in Alaska. Earlier this year, we were made aware of an additional 4 KC-135s that are going to join that fleet at Eielson. Thank you. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. I am also aware of the Air Force plan to divest the KC-135s as the KC-46s are available to replace our aging tanker fleet. Can you give me an update on the current timeline for divestiture, when we might begin seeing those in Alaska? And then as a follow-on, whether or not those KC-135s will be replaced with the KC-46s, and whether there's a chance that those KC-46s will rotate in and out of Alaska in the interim.
Sure. So as far as the 4 KC-135s that we spoke about that are coming to Alaska with about approximately 200 airmen and their families, that should occur in fiscal year 23.
Okay.
That'll be after we've gone through the environmental assessment to bring up that capability. What I do see, based on mission requirements and the opportunity to train up in Jay Park with Red Flag, Alaska, is the opportunity for KC-46s to come in either to support actual missions or to do training. And so I do suspect you will see KC-46s operating up in Alaska. I would also add, as the Air Force has laid out its Arctic strategy, to operate the KC-46 in an Arctic environment will also be important. As we go to the future for our tanker fleet, to maintain our fleet of 479 tankers, we will get to 179 KC-46s and 300 KC-135s. So we will maintain KC-135s for a period of time. At some point, probably a number of years into the future, we'll have to take a look at those remaining KC-135s and how we recapitalize those going forward.
But you do see those KC-46s as being part of this rotation in Alaska then?
Yes, ma'am. Because just like most of our for the Air Force, our capability to operate all around the world, as I say, anytime, anywhere, to include Alaska, is an opportunity to bring the KC-46s to Alaska and many other places around the world.
Good. Appreciate that. We had a hearing a couple weeks ago with General Hokanson. This was the National Guard and Reserve hearing, and I had asked him if he could take a look into the HH-60 upgrades and the additional aircraft that are needed for the 3 rescue squadrons there at JBER. What I'm told is that these HH-60s that belong to the 176 have the highest operational tempo in the Air Force, and they have the highest utilization rate. We recognize that the wing needs additional and upgraded HH-60s. They've got a pretty stepped-up mission demand, and then this growing focus, as you have just mentioned, that the DoD has placed on the Arctic region, just really just builds on that. The current plan to bed down additional aircraft in the state isn't targeted until 2026, so there's kind of a misalignment here, and I raised this with General Hokanson. He mentioned at that hearing that he intended to connect with you to talk about this, so I'd ask you the same question. What options exist to allow for perhaps a reprioritization of these assets? And is this utilization rate calculated in the decision-making process?
Senator, as we look at the laydown for our H-60s and our Gulfs and our Whiskies, which are our new models, we do the swap out based on the oldest aircraft. And the Alaska International Guard with their H-60s have the newest of our G models that they just received in 2020, which and we do look at the operational tempo. We also look at age of the aircraft as we make that transition, which drives to where Alaska now has the newest of the Gs, and then they'll be in line to get the newest, the Whiskey, which is our newer model, as you described, in 2026.
Yeah. Well, again, we recognize that there's a lot of work that goes into that particular mission. My time has expired, but General Raymond, know that I would like to follow up with you, and I'll probably do so by way of a question for the record with regards to updates on where we are with the Space Guard Reserve Force. As you know, we've had an opportunity to talk about the role of Clear Air Force Station there and how that is just key to essential Space Force assets. So I'll look forward to that update.
Thank you, ma'am. I look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Generals and Mr. Secretary. I want to talk to you, Mr. Secretary, about energy reliability. The President issued an executive order establishing a federal clean energy standard, electricity standard, and it requires all government agencies, including DOD, to use their procurement authority to help move the country towards a carbon-free electricity sector by 2035. So can you talk to me about how you're using your procurement authority to comply with the President's executive order?
We are, in fact, using that authority. We have focused on developing a series of energy projects that try to enhance our installation resilience. And so we are using some pretty well-established contract avenues and venues to both utilities and energy savings companies in order to improve our posture in terms of the energy resilience of our bases. There's actually something called a Federal Utilities Partnership Working Group that we are part of and that we work with in order to enhance our energy resilience.
Those sound like ongoing efforts. Is there anything that you've changed as a result of the President's executive order?
Well, the answer is we have budgeted in FY22 an additional $68 million over and above what we've had in terms of the past level of funding in order to increase our emphasis on those kinds of things. And there's two kinds of energy resilience that we look at in particular. One is installation resilience, and of course we are a major energy user for our aircraft as well. In terms of the entire defense enterprise, we, the Air Force, for better or worse, use 2/3 of the total fuel bill in the entire Air Force.
I want to just drill down a little deeper because
Sure.
it seems to me that there are projects and programs and initiatives, right? Energy savings performance contracts and all of that, and then the fuel stuff is, I think, a longer lead time item, we can all agree. But specifically using the procurement system for your sort of run-of-the-mill, especially base and installation sort of operations, is what I'm trying to get at, because I think you can carve out a sort of clean energy project and point to it, that's one thing, but unless you use the full power of the department and its procurement authority, then I don't think you're entirely complying with the executive order. And I'd ask you to take another look at that and not just sort of rely upon, hey, what are we doing in clean energy and how does that match up with the President's executive order? But rather, we've got these authorities. The President is asking us to use those in our daily procurement of energy, and I think that part hasn't quite yet happened. First of all, do you agree with that, or you think I'm getting that wrong?
I'm not sure, so let me do this. Let me commit to you. Let's get together and let me send some of the folks who are the subject matter experts to talk to you. I'm not that deep on it, and so I think that's a fair point. And I think let's provide you more details, and we can go from there.
Okay, thank you. And just following along these lines, after Hurricane Michael destroyed part of Tyndall Air Force Base and damaged more than a dozen F-22s there, the Air Force made a very quick basing decision to move 3 F-35 squadrons to the base, and there's just no evidence, and I've looked very hard for it, that the Air Force made that decision with any consideration of the fact that we are facing increasing severity and frequency of severe weather, and especially where Tyndall is, it's almost a guarantee that it's going to get a hit again with a severe weather event. And so I'd like you to tell me whether there's something I'm missing regarding the analysis that was performed in deciding to base the F-35s there. I get the range issue, although there's as you know, there's an Air Force installation, I think 90 miles away, so that there's an argument around that. But more specifically, even if you did arrive at, this is an important range, we don't want to lose it, it's perfect for the F-35s, you still have to do a climate analysis, right? You still have, and not for ideological reasons, but because we don't want to lose our assets again. And I'm wondering if you can speak to whether or not there was any analysis about severe weather impacting our assets.
Well, what drove the decision in general was, in fact, the availability of the airspace and the fact that it is a terrific asset for us to train with. That said, I think we're actually pretty proud of rebuilding Tyndall. If we have an opportunity, we'd love for you to come take a look at it. It is going to be a model base, and we're taking the climate impact very much into consideration. The building that we're doing is well above building code. We're going to make sure that our buildings can absorb a certain amount of storm surge. They're going to be a foot or more above what they were before. And the buildings are going to be built to a higher wind standard, 165 miles an hour, whereas I think the local code is something like 125 miles an hour. So we're well aware of the kind of risks that are involved in that region, and we're going to try to make sure that Tyndall is much more resilient than it was in the past.
Thank you.
Yeah, we got great airspace in Montana, too. Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and thank you for having this very important hearing. Secretary Roth, we appreciated your phone call last week regarding the basing of the F-35s and the Air Force, the Singapore Air Force F-16s. That was good news, and again, as I said, that's great for the area and all of that, but that really is the best decision for the country. General Brown, we appreciated getting to visit with you on the phone not too long ago and talking about Air Force priorities. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to visit with Chief Bass. She represents you very, very well, and I think is doing an outstanding job. You all make a great team. And then General Raymond, earlier today, getting to visit with you about your priorities. Thank all of you all for the great job that you're doing, and we will help you any way we can. You know that. The Air Force, General Brown, is looking at growing its fleet of F-35s, fifth-generation fighters, in order to keep up, to counter adversarial threats. They're some of the most expensive programs in the defense budget. How's the Air Force getting, how are we doing, and again, this is for all of you all, what are we doing to lower our procurement cost? How are we able to sustain costs so that we can continue to equip our airmen with the best aircraft in the world?
Well, I'll start, and then
yes, sir.
we can move on. What we have adopted in terms of acquisition of new systems is we are trying to take advantage of many of the new authorities that have been provided to us in recent authorization acts in terms of trying to do things smarter, trying to do things quicker, and being more agile in how we do things. Greater use of prototyping, greater use of using sort of serial kind of procurement rather than focusing on one end objective and having a 20-year kind of an acquisition program. So we're being much more agile. We talked earlier today about the digital trinity. So we're using digital engineering, we're using open systems architecture, and we're using those kinds of capabilities as we go forward. I would offer that 2 or 3 of our major examples of that are in the FY22 budget. One is the Next Generation Air Dominance Program, which is platform-centric, and it's looking in terms of making sort of a serial improvement to the platform as we go forward. The other is the global, the strategic missile, the ICBM replacement program. And that, too, is using heavy use. I had an opportunity to go out to Hill Air Force Base and visit with both the government side and the contractor side. And it's just fascinating the way they're using just basically modeling, digital engineering modeling and they have met every milestone in terms of cost, schedule, and performance to date. Still relatively early in the program, but they're making great progress. So we're trying to make sure that we try to delegate down to the lowest level in terms of program management and to try to reduce the bureaucracy in terms of reviews. That said, we establish metrics, we establish risk-based metrics, and we are going to constantly look at whether people are meeting those metrics or not. So in general, we're trying to break the bureaucracy, trying to move more agile, quicker across the board.
General Brown, quickly, or the chairman will yell at me. The F-15EX, why is it so important to the tactical fighter fleet? And what capabilities does it have that complement the 5th generation fighters like the F-35?
The real capability of the F-15EX is the aspect that comes in to replace the F-15Cs. Okay. And the F-15Cs have really aged out. We need to retire those. The beauty of the F-15EX is that really about 70 to 90% of the infrastructure, the equipment that we already have can be used. So it makes a very smooth transition to this particular capability. It will also complement because of the size and payload that it can carry. Can be a weapons truck is the way we kind of describe it, to provide firepower where we have the F-35 that actually now can penetrate more deeply, and the combination of those two provide things that our adversaries have to think about because we have several different options of ways we can come after them.
Good, thank you. Note, Mr. Chairman, that I got done on time.
Right on the mark. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Raymond, given your desire for affordable access to space, you're well aware that we need to continue to lower the cost of space launch. And the Air Force Research Laboratory is doing some really good work in advancing the state-of-the-art rocket engines, particularly with regard to upper stage engines. As a state that knows how to make things, Wisconsin has been proudly supporting these efforts. In that context, as we review the Space Force's fiscal year 22 budget, I note that rocket propulsion research and development is a particular area of concern. I want to ensure that it's adequately resourced to support domestic high-tech manufacturing in support of future space endeavors. So can I get your commitment to, number one, acquaint yourself with the Air Force Research Laboratory's great progress on the upper stage engine development, and secondly, to ensure that future budgets include sufficient funding necessary to expand domestic capacity to manufacture the components that will support both our industrial base and affordable space launch.
You absolutely have my commitment. Access to space is critical to our national security. Being able to do it responsibly is also critical, especially in a contested domain. Our launch strategy has 3 components. 1, to have assured access, 2, to increase competition, and 3, to get off the RD-180 engine. And in all 3 of those tenets, our strategy is working great, and we're in a really good spot. We're now beginning to invest in kind of the phase 3 areas that you mentioned, and I'm open to all comers. We want more, broaden the industrial base, get more research and development money to be able to do that and give us opportunities in the future. You have absolutely have my commitment.
Thank you. My next question is for the entire panel. President Biden announced that he will withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan by September of this year. Ultimately, while I think it was a very difficult decision, I think it was the right one to make. That said, we all know that there will be an enduring counterterrorism and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance requirements. Considering this decision was made while the fiscal year 22 budget request was being developed, where in the Air Force and Space Force budgets are these enduring ISR and over-the-horizon requirements reflected? And do either need particular attention paid to them in this year's appropriation cycle? Well, we start with General Brown.
Senator, I appreciate the question. I will tell you that the capabilities that we have today that have been supporting United States Central Command, and when you talk about Afghanistan, but also all of our combatant commands, much of that capability still remains inside of the United States Air Force with this particular budget. Although I will tell you, we are also making a transition to the future. So small levels of divestment as we start to look towards the future, maintaining the capability that we've been using today, at the same time looking forward at a capability that will ensure that we are be able to connect it, be persistent, and be survivable, not only in a permissive environment, but in a highly contested environment as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and so in the budget, where would you see it in the FY20? Amongst other places, although there is no longer an overseas contingency operation budget, so-called OCO budget, we have within the base budget, we are funding both day-to-day war operations at a much lower pace, about $1 billion or so for the Air Force, but more importantly, to your point and your question, there is an enduring presence we still have in the CENTCOM AR. And so we've budgeted about $10 billion there. We have a series of air bases. They will stay for the time being. That's where your over-the-horizon capability will come from. So we have funded as best we knew, lead time away as it goes. We are continuing an enduring presence in the CENTCOM AR in order to provide that over-the-horizon capability.
The great thing about space capabilities, ma'am, are they're global. And so you don't have to build something, just stick it over that part of the world. They're constantly orbiting. They provide that persistence, and will continue to do so.
Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Appreciate it. General Brown, thank you for your recent visits to both Minot Air Force Base and Grand Forks Air Force Base. Very impressive. And also, General Raymond, thank you for your recent visits to Grand Forks Base and the surrounding area as well. Mr. Secretary, I understand that our chairman asked you about the MH-139. And that you gave good answers there, at least from our perspective. Mine is simply, are you confident we can keep that program on schedule?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as you're aware, the reason there is a delay in a program is that we don't have the FAA certification yet. But as I understand it, we're on schedule. This should only mean a fairly minor delay of some months in the program, and it's not a showstopper. So our intent. We had 8 aircraft that were funded already in FY21. The next tranche will be funded in FY23. The only reason you see a gap there in FY22, that particular procurement contract was simply not executable in our judgment during the 12 months of FY22. So it was simply a shift from late in FY22 into early FY23.
And then both LRSO and GBSD, do you feel they're on schedule and can stay on schedule?
Yes, both programs are meeting all their schedule and cost milestones to date. Admittedly, I would say, channeling my former comptroller background, is still pretty early in both programs. But they're doing terrific, and both programs are making heavy use of some of the new technologies in terms of digital engineering and those kinds of things. So both programs, we hope for the LRSO to be able to award the next contract this month. It is now shifting as we speak into the engineering, manufacturing, development stage, so-called Milestone B in our nomenclature. So they just had their board review, and we anticipate being able to award that contract this month.
Thank you. General Brown, same question. As far as the B-52 and the re-engineering, on schedule, and do you anticipate that we can keep it on schedule?
I do. We're at a point where it looks like really about this December we'll be able to down select on the re-engineering, down to the company will actually do the re-engineering for the B-52.
Okay, good. And then also, what about getting a weapons generation facility going for Mounted Air Force Base, which is the only dual nuclear base in the country, as of course you well know. And again, thank you for your visit.
As part of our discussion, we were there at Minot, was because of its dual capability, it'll be the last of the three, because we'll learn quite a bit from the other two locations that we're going to do before we get to Minot. And because of its uniqueness, I think really important we get this right, not only for the others, but for Minot as well.
Well, we'd like to work with your office to get a time for starting it.
Understood. Understood, Senator.
Thank you, General.
Thank you.
General Raymond, again, thanks for your visit. So we're working on laser communication with satellites rather than radio waves. So ground to laser to satellite, satellite to satellite, satellite to ISR. Why is that important? And talk to me about your commitment to accomplish that.
Sir, Senator, the importance is resilience. As I mentioned in our posture statement, the domain has become much more contested, and our adversaries are developing capabilities to be able to deny or disrupt our access to communication satellites. This provides a layer of resilience. It's absolutely critical. It's what we're focused on.
So we very much need those low Earth orbit satellites. We need to keep moving on this to stay ahead of our adversaries like Russia and China, and we need to develop the laser communications, again, to stay ahead of our adversaries, and it's a high priority?
It's a high priority, and I would say, Senator, we really need to develop kind of a hybrid architecture, and the work that we're doing to do that force design is a mix. Today, the design is small numbers of very expensive, exquisite satellites, and we have to diversify that architecture. There's going to, for resilience, the low Earth orbit piece of that's going to be important, as well as other orbits, but it's absolutely critical.
Exactly. We need both.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate your being here. Secretary Roth, General Brown, let me start with you. The 92nd and 141st Air Force Air Refueling Wings at Fairchild Air Force Base are really vital to our global mobility and our global reach, and it's important to me that we make sure that these units are optimally equipped to meet their mission. I really support the Air Force's recent selection of Fairchild as a candidate location for the next KC-46 main operating base. They have consistently been a top-scoring installation because of their strategic location, their existing infrastructure, and their strong community support, and it's long past time to get them those tankers. But I am concerned that the proposed divestments of KC-135s will hurt the air refueling mission based in Washington State. What new missions and assets are you going to bring to Fairchild to continue investing in Fairchild and the community for the long term?
Well, in terms of, as you said, the KC-46 is a competitor. We're all the way up to main operating base number 6 as we're going through our strategic basing process. So Fairchild is a terrific candidate, to receive that next tranche of reserve of aircraft. So that's at least a partial answer to your question, that we would bring, we could potentially bring KC-46. I would defer to the general here in terms of what other things.
And Senator, for the Air Force, we'd also look at other mission sets as we evolve and transform and transition to the future of opportunities at Fairchild. Not only the KC-46, but other opportunities.
Okay, and if you can get me more details on that, I would really appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. General Raymond, the space industry is really growing rapidly as access to space increases and demand for space-based products and services is really growing. My home state of Washington is becoming a major hub now for launch, satellite engineering, education, and many other parts of the space community. And that growth and innovation is really important both for our economy and for achieving the goals of the Defense Space Strategy. But government support is going to play an essential role in helping this industry through its nascent stages until it can reach its full potential. So talk with me about how the Space Force will use its market power to really encourage diversity and growth in the space industry.
Well, first of all, I would agree wholeheartedly with you that there's incredible things going on in that part of the country. I've been up there personally several times to visit launch and satellite manufacturing. It's really important. I think if you look at the challenges that we face, are many, but we have even greater opportunities, and those opportunities are those innovative small companies. What we're doing to get after this is working a force design that allows us to diversify our architecture, to allow smaller satellites that are more operationally relevant to play a greater role in our national security architecture. And so we're doing that design work now. That's going to open up more opportunities for those types of capabilities to be a critical part of our path going forward. And I think there's great opportunity.
Good. Well, I look forward to working with you on that. It's really exciting. Secretary Roth, across the country and in my home state of Washington, families are facing a real shortage of affordable housing. The military is supposed to cover housing costs as part of a service member's benefits, but more than 3/4 of them are having to supplement that out of pocket right now. And of course, military moves are made more stressful by long on-base housing wait lists. We're seeing them everywhere, and really competitive rental and buyer's markets off base. I'm hearing from military families at Fairchild, for example, about they are just really struggling with these challenges. How does the Air Force evaluate the need for additional on-base family housing under the Military Housing Privatization Initiative? And what can be done to help families near Fairchild with this right now?
Well, one, the basic allowance for housing is reviewed annually, and we work with our Office Secretary of Defense partners to do the analysis. It's locality-based. It's not a general rate across the country, and so it is tailored to each individual location. And so the intent is that the basic allowance for housing cover the costs in any particular area. If it's not, if there's an unusual spike or something, we try to catch up as best we can. In terms of actively looking forward in the future in terms of any further military housing like privatization initiative and that type of thing, right now it was enormously successful 15, 20 years ago. We did a lot of progress and all, but we did so in part because we got an exception to the Office of Management and Budget scoring rules in order to allow us to capitalize with private money and put up a fairly modest amount of government money and leverage some private money. Under the current rules, the Office of Management and Budget has fallen back now to the old rules where they would require us to capitalize that up front and under a full funding concept pay for it up front. That gets to be very expensive. So for the time being, unfortunately, we are not pursuing that. We'd have to work with the administration and the Office of Management and Budget to see if any further waivers were possible or not. But
Okay, I'd like to follow up with you after this on that, because this is really a critical problem for our families, and I'm worried about the stress it's putting on them, and it's just not tenable at this point. And I know I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. I did just want to mention childcare to all of you. The wait lists are really long, and we're hearing from everyone that this is just really a stark reminder that we need to deal with this. I don't have time for a question right now. I'll follow up with all of you, but I've not lost sight of this. And Mr. Chairman, it's a huge problem for our military families.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Raymond, I was a skeptic when it came to the creation of the Space Force. I listened to the critics argue that it was a new bureaucracy that would be top-heavy, a pile of brass and not much underneath, and that it wasn't needed. I never questioned the role of space in terms of our own defense and the critical achievements which we can point to over the last few years. So you are the man in transition from the old way to the new way. How's it changed?
It's changed significantly, and I'll tell you, it's quantifiable. When you elevate from a major command of an Air Force to a service chief, your level of authority and responsibility goes way up. I have a stronger role in requirements. I'm a member of the Joint Chiefs, so I can make sure that space is integrated into into the joint warfighting construct. We interact more effectively with our allies and partners at the service level. In fact, with Norway, we just inked a deal where it saved us $900 million to put 2 hosted payloads on their satellites rather than our own satellites. The development of our space professionals has gone through the roof. Promotion rates before were 20% below the Air Force average for colonels and lieutenant colonels, about that same number. Today, we're above that average. We've got more people knocking on our door wanting to come into the Space Force than we have positions for. We can be very selective of who we bring in. Across the board, we have seen measurable, quantifiable increases that's great for our nation.
So, General Brown, when you hear that, does it give you any kind of pause or inspiration for the rest of the Air Force in terms of what's happened with the Space Force?
It does. And one of the key areas that I see is because of the elevation of Space Force, it actually has brought in more, I would say, collaboration between the Air Force and the Space Force across our airmen and our guardians because of the dialogue that happens at a much lower level on how we talk about space capabilities. And so there's some real pluses there. The other part is now you have someone who's really focused on that domain. If, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, my predecessor would have been responsible for both. Now you have someone focused on a new domain, and it allows the both of us to really work very closely together on how we use those future capabilities and align those capabilities between our 2 services.
Secretary Roth, are there any changes in procurement or acquisition with this Space Force that you're considering or have implemented?
Well, first of all, the Space Force is another one that is making maximum use of some of the new authorities we have in terms of using things like digital engineering and being more agile and alike. So I would have to say that the Space Force is out and leading on that as well. What's going to happen eventually on 1 October 2022, or at least no later than 1 October 2022, the Space Force will have their own their own service acquisition executive. Right now, we have one service acquisition executive for both the air and space side, but under the Authorization Act of a year or two ago, we have to stand up a separate office, an Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for space acquisition and integration, but space acquisition here to the point. So I would think here too, very similarly, you have someone then who will be focused on space acquisition and won't be quote unquote distracted by other functions as well.
Can I add in, sir? I just want to say very clearly that we would not be anywhere near where we are today without the great support of General Brown and the Air Force. One of the when the law was passed that established the Space Force, it said to focus on space superiority and rely on the Air Force for the support pieces. They provided us spectacular support. As we built this, they've really been a huge partner.
Secretary Roth, different subject. Our modern military has really been grounded on civilian control and the separation of men and women in uniform from political influence. What are you doing to make sure that the next generation serving in the Air Force lives up to that model?
Well, I think the short answer to is by leadership and making sure that the Secretariat does in fact use its authority and its influence as we go forward. Clearly, I think that's, we're in a period of transition now from one administration to the other, so it's a bit of an uncertain time until we fill all the positions. And so the imperative will be to get a full team of political appointees in place and then to move forward under the guise of ensuring civilian oversight over the military. I work very closely with both of the chiefs. I value their opinion and all, but at the end of the day, the Secretariat is in fact the leadership position within the Department of the Air Force.
Thank you. General Brown, in closing, I just want to commend you for statements that you've made on diversity and race relations in the military. I'm sure that there are many stories that have gone untold that you could fill in with some of your experiences. But thank you for reaching the top of your profession. I'm glad you're there, and thanks for the example and model you set.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. We appreciate you folks being here today. We appreciate the testimony you've given today, and we appreciate the job that you do every day. So thank you. Thank the witnesses. Senators may submit additional written questions, and we ask you to respond to them within a reasonable amount of time. Next week, the Full Appropriations Committee will have testimony from the Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That will be on June 17th at 10 a.m. This Defense Subcommittee will reconvene on Tuesday, June 22nd at 10 a.m. to hear from the Army leadership on the fiscal year 2022 Army budget request. And with that, this committee stands in recess.